Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I received your message. I'm actually driving right now, so I'm going to record the message while I'm driving, if that's all right with you. I pray that you don't think it's bad adab, but I think I have plenty of time right now, and if I could send you a recording, I could explain things. And because I have plenty of time, I might be able to flesh things out a bit. So the first thing is, I already explained this, how we do it in Pakistan. So everything I'm saying is how Pakistanis do hifz. First thing is, I'm just going to lay it out, the sort of program that we do, and then after that I'll try to see if it's necessary for me to mention each component separately. The first thing is, as I told you, it's a 3-tier program. There are 3 things to how Pakistanis do hifz. The first thing we call sabak. The second thing is sabki, and the third is manzil. Sabak is the homework that you do every single day. And you would see in a lot of hifz tips, they say, oh, you have to do sabak, and if you do sabak, do 1 page a day, and you'll finish the Qur'an in this many days. That's not very realistic in my experience, in my opinion. I think hifz, you start off with a small amount and you build up. And each person has their own specific capacity. So you can't say do a page a day. So for example, when I started hifz, I started off with probably 3 lines, 4 lines a day, max. And then eventually I built it up to 7 lines. And then when I got a bit better, it became 9 lines, then 10 lines, and so on. Eventually, my last homework, I managed to memorize 1/4. So it's not the program. The program that you're going to follow is not 1 page a day. It should be how much you're able to do, and you're the best judge of that. And it depends on how much time you could give and how well your memorizational ability is. So I'm not going to say that the homework is 1 page a day. The homework is as much as you're able to do. Just make sure that you put pressure on yourself. Don't go for something too easy, but don't memorize too much that you can't keep everything retained. Because you don't want that the homework that you do, what we call sabak, you don't want that the sabak that you're memorizing is compromising sabki and manzil. The 3 things that are involved in this program should not come in the way of each other. So if you're doing one thing, it should be done in a way that there's still sufficient time left for the other 2. And the other 2 are core as well. A lot of times when people do hifz, they try to rush things, they want to get their hifz done, and I'm seeing this in America. People focus too much on the sabak aspect, where they're memorizing a certain amount every day, and then they assume that they're eventually going to give time to the rest, or once they're done with their hifz, they'll tidy it up all later. That's not realistic. Everything has to be done side by side. This program, based on unbiased, I think the Pakistani method is very secure for your memorization of the Qur'an. So that's the only experience that I have. But if I try to think about it, and if I try to be objective, I find it very compelling. So the first thing is sabak, which is every morning, and I'll lay out the routine that we do, and then you could see how you fit it in. In Pakistan, when we used to do hifz, it was a full-time program. We used to come after Fajr, we used to pray Fajr at home, and then we would go to the madrasa for hifz, and we would go there right after Fajr. Half an hour after Fajr, the class would start. The class would begin with an assembly. I'm just mentioning this as a side point. It's not relevant to our conversation right now. But we would have an assembly. One of the students would recite the Qur'an, and then after that, all of us would be reciting Mawlaya Salli wa Sallim Da'iman, standing, and then we would recite a kalam of Imam Ahmad Rada Khan, which is in the praise of the Messenger Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and then the classes would begin. So the first section of the day would be designated for reciting the homework to the teacher. So you memorize the homework at night. You memorize it at home. The first section of the day, it's already memorized. You refresh it, you recite it to a classmate of yours, and when it's ready, you go to the teacher and then you recite it. So right now I'm just capturing the general gist. You recite the homework to the teacher, that's the first section. And then there's a breakfast break for 45 minutes to 1 hour. And then the second section is sabki. Sabki is reciting the juz behind the homework that's freshest in your memory. Because this has not been solidified yet in your memory. Right now it's still fresh. And when the juz is fresh, that means it's easier to forget as well. Because you have not recycled it many times yet. That's why you have to be extra diligent with the things that are freshest in your memory. You have to do them more repetitively compared to your manzil, which is the third section that we're going to get to in a bit. So you have to do your sabki. Sabki is, if you're starting your hifz off, usually what happens, because you don't have that many ajza reserved in your memory, initially your sabki is going to be half a juz. So if you're doing the third page of the third spara, the third juz, you're going to go back a juz. It's a calculation, it's an estimation. It doesn't have to be exactly a juz, but it should be around half a juz. This is if you have 5 ajza memorized or less. 5 ajza, 6 ajza, it's not written in stone. The teacher determines this, but usually what I remember is if you have 5 ajza memorized or less, the sabki, which is the precious part, that is usually half a juz. So the second section of the day, when we come back from our breakfast break, we recite that. If you have more than 5 ajza memorized, then your sabki is 1 juz every single day. And this is a formula until the end of the Qur'an, that you have to recite to the teacher every single day the juz that is freshest in your memory, which means the 1 juz including the homework. So you recite the entire juz, and then you also recite the entire homework. Now, I will also add that what you're doing, you're not in a program. You have other things to do for the rest of your day. So I'm going to give you the program that we do, and then you have to tailor it and fit it according to what your schedule allows, because you're a married man, you have responsibilities, you're a student for other things as well. Usually, I think the best time for hifz is to start before the age of 11, maximum 12, to start before that. Because at that age, you don't have many responsibilities, and when you have your parents and your teacher designing the program for you, your nafs doesn't get involved that much because you do what your parents say. There's authority that's dictating your schedule. So it's a lot easier when you're younger. So I'm going to give you the program. This might not be realistic for your schedule. You tailor it for your schedule, but I would suggest that you do adopt this threefold method that the Pakistanis or the Desi ulama or hufaz do. So you have to do your sabki. Sabki is what I've told you. The third section of the day is manzil. Manzil is every other part of the Qur'an that is not the sabak, which is the homework, the daily homework, and it is not sabki, which is the freshest juz or half juz in your memory. Everything else is manzil. And the way manzil works is you do 1 juz a day, and it's a continuous recycling of what you have memorized. That's the purpose of the manzil. The reason we solidify things in sabki is that usually when things go to manzil, you are not reading it every single day. So, for example, if you have memorized 10 ajza, and your sabki is the 9th juz, juz number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, this is your manzil. One day you're going to recite the first juz, the next day is going to be the second juz, the third day is going to be the third, and so on. This is continuously being recycled. You have to make sure that even if when you're reciting it to the teacher and you don't recite it well even if it might take a day or two, but you have to be diligent that it's continuously being recycled. That's what keeps everything else intact. And it is hard to memorize a day, but what's harder is to preserve everything. Manzil is the long race. So you have the sprint, the homework every day, that's a sprint. The manzil is the marathon. And this is something that you have to do for the rest of your life. Manzil stays with you for the rest of your life. Sabak, sabki, eventually when you're done with your hifz, they move on. But every single day, even after your hifz, we've been given a formula which, I'm just mentioning everything all together, but we were given a formula, even after our hifz, every morning we would recite 3 ajza, and then we would recite 3 azat to ourselves looking at the Qur'an, and then we would also recite 1 azat to the teacher without looking. So it's very important that you do your manzil consistently. Everything has to be recycled, because if it's not being recycled, it's the memorization of it is lessening, and you don't even realize it. A lot of this is subconscious, so you have to make sure that on the conscious part, you're following a rigid program. Hifz is all about discipline. If you follow a certain program, so for example, you tailor everything that I tell you, and you fit it into your program, once you establish that this is the program that you're going to follow, you have to be highly disciplined in doing it every single day. No matter what function comes, no matter what responsibilities come, once you establish the program, and you're going to establish the program based off of your responsibilities, based off of the different activities that you have to do. All of that being considered, you make a program. But once the program is done, that has to be done very consistently. And if there are optional things that you have to do, they take a backseat to your hifz. Hifz has to be given precedence until you complete it, or however you want to do, but there has to be a daily regimen. That's manzil. And then afterwards, we would go home and we would memorize our homework at home. You could do it wherever you want, but some madaris, the students used to stay in the madrasa, so it was a bit different for them. But in our case, we used to go back home and we used to memorize our homework back home. This is the general gist of the program. Now, different people have different ways of memorizing. So when you're memorizing your homework, people have different techniques, but there is one thing that you have to consider. When you are memorizing, it is not only memorization through the activity of your tongue. This is something a lot of people, our teachers made us understand this. When you are memorizing, there are 3 organs involved. It's not just your tongue constantly repeating things, and the memorization is being done through these 3 organs: the tongue, the eye, and the ears. So when you are memorizing, you have to make sure everything is being pronounced properly. That's a given. Because a lot of times, give me 1 second, I don't want to miss this term. 1 second, I missed it. I'm waiting for all these cars to pass. There's a whole line. But when you're memorizing, there are 3 organs involved. The tongue has to be... Oh, thank you so much. This guy gave me space. May Allah bless him, and bless him with the best in this world and the hereafter. So initially, when you're memorizing your homework, you have to read loud. When you're reading loud, and you have to pronounce the words properly. So a lot of times, for example, when I'm leading Taraweeh and I'm about to make a mistake, a lot of times I might not know what the next word is, but automatically my tongue comes towards the middle of my teeth. So, I'll know that it's a fa or it's a zal because when I was doing hifz, my teacher made me pronounce the letters. So when the next letter is coming, I've done it so many times that my tongue's programmed to place itself, or my throat's programmed to get ready to pronounce the next letter. So you have to make sure that all the letters are being pronounced well. Second thing is you have to read loud. You have to read loud because your ears are also playing a role in your memorization. Your memorization's not going to be good if you're reciting in your mouth. You have to read loud. And when you recite in your mouth, that ruins your pronunciation. And when it comes to pronunciation is like martial arts. Everything has a position. All the positions have to be mastered. And a lot of times, even if you're hafiz for many years, if you don't recite for a whole year and you recite a year later, you're going to realize that your tongue, your throat, and all the mechanics of pronunciation, they're going to be blunt. The blade is going to be dull. So you have to make sure that when you are reciting, All the letters have to be pronounced properly, and you have to read out loud, because when you read in your mouth, that compromises your pronunciation. You can't read well if you're reading in your mouth. Not only does it compromise your memorization, it compromises your pronunciation, so you have to read out loud. The last thing is you have to look. Alhamdulillah, we have blind hufaz as well, and Allah has given them the ability that their other senses sharpen, but in our case, visualization helps a lot. So a lot of times when I am reciting, I'm able to, sometimes when I make mistakes, I'm able to visualize how the verse is, where the word is, how it's positioned on that page, which part of the page it is in. A lot of times when the page is about to turn, I know it's about to turn. That helps in your memorization. So when you are initially memorizing your sabak, when you're initially memorizing your homework, you have to make sure that you read it 3 to 7 times looking. And when you're memorizing, first you have to read the whole, so if you're doing the whole page, the first thing you have to do is 3 to 7 times. Each person knows how well it settles in your mind after a certain number of times. This is all tailored. It's different from person to person, so you have to determine this. But 3 to 7 times initially, the first thing you have to do is you have to recite your homework. Yeah, so 3 to 7 times you recite all of your homework, you read all of it, you read it out loud, and just looking. Right now we're not memorizing yet. Right now we are just making the tongue and the eyes and the ear familiar, and the ears familiar with the word. So 3 to 7 times you're just going to recite, and you have to make sure that you are looking earnestly. That's the first thing. Once you've done that, your mouth, your tongue, everything has become familiar with the words. The next step is you see each person has a different amount that they could memorize in one go. So for example, if you're reciting لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَإِن تُبْدُوا مَا فِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوْ تُخْفُوهُ يُحَاسِبْكُم بِهِ اللَّهُ. Some people could memorize 2 lines in one go. Some people do half a line in one go. Some people do 1 line in one go. This is from person to person. But that section that you do in one go, initially, you read that section, you read as many times as you can looking. And when you feel like you're comfortable, now you're not going to look so much that you don't test yourself for 10 minutes. You know best, every now and then you have to test yourself as well. Once you got the visualization down, read it a couple of times and then look up, the Qur'an is in front of you, the Mus'haf is in front of you, then you look up and you recite it without looking. And then you look down again and see if everything was recited correctly, everything was recited properly. If it was, you move on to the next section. Now this one section is memorized as a separate component in your mind. And I'll explain to you why I use the word component. Then you memorize the next amount that you could memorize. This is the next section. Once you've memorized that, now you have to recite both of them, looking together once, twice, you know best. Now, these 2 are separate components. In your mind, the purpose that we're reciting both of them together is to glue them together. So that, for example, if the first section that you memorize is لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, and the second section, then you memorize that, you moved on. Second section is وَإِن تُبْدُوا مَا فِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوْ تُخْفُوهُ يُحَاسِبْكُم بِهِ اللَّهُ. You could cut it. This is just for an example. You memorize the second section. Now, the problem is these 2 sections, the separate components have been memorized, but if you're reciting your manzil or if you're reciting your sabki and you read لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, it's not going to follow through that you're going to say, oh, the next part is وَإِن تُبْدُوا مَا فِي أَنفُسِكُم, because you memorize them as separate components. You have to glue them together. And how you glue these 2 components together to make these 2 components one, what you have to do is you have to read both of them together once, twice, however you think is best. So once you're done memorizing the 2 parts, you would say لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَإِن تُبْدُوا مَا فِي أَنفُسِكُم لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَإِن تُبْدُوا مَا فِي أَنفُسِكُم لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَإِن تُبْدُوا مَا فِي أَنفُسِكُم. Now, when you are doing this, it's not 2 separate components anymore. It becomes one component. That's the purpose. Then you do the third section. Then you combine all of that together. Now, if the homework that you're doing is half a page, or if it's 1 page, you eventually reach a point where it's not practical anymore to constantly go back and connect all of it together, because it's going to take too long. So what you do is, you break if you're memorizing for the day 1 page, you could break that page into 3 sections. So you're combining all these sections together, and eventually you reach 4 lines, you reach 5 lines. Once you've done those 5 lines, you put those 5 lines to the side. You're not going to go back to the beginning of the page anymore. You put those 5 lines to the side, and you memorize the next 5 lines, break it up into sections, glue those sections together, but you're going to do those 5 lines as a separate thing. Once you do those separate 5 lines, then you read the first 5 lines with the second 5 lines, and you read it a couple of times looking. Remember, when you memorize, you look when you start looking, and when you're gluing them, you have to initially begin with looking as well. So you don't immediately read without looking, assuming that, oh, I had the first 5 lines memorized, I have the second 5 lines memorized, now I'm just going to test them without looking. No, first you look, and in your mind, it should follow through that when this verse ends, this verse begins. You got to visualize that. You memorize the first 5 lines, you memorize the second 5 lines, and then you glue them together. And then you put the first 10 lines to the side. We're not concerned with that right now. You memorize the third 5 lines. This is just an example. You have to break it up. I'm just giving you a gist. You memorize the second 5 lines, you do half a line, then you do the second half of a line, then you glue that together, then you do another line, you glue it with the rest. Once you get 5 lines again, then you read the whole thing once or twice, and then you glue all of it together. When you are reciting to yourself, it's memorized, it's good, but when you recite it to someone else, there is a pressure to that. And when you recite all of it, that's why it's very important to have a teacher. If you don't have a teacher, you could recite it to your wife. She does not have to be a hafiz. You can recite it to anyone there. But once you're done with your homework, you have to recite it to someone. You should not just be content that, oh, I recited it to myself and I did not have any mistakes, so I'm good. Because when you recite it to someone else, there's a pressure to it. And when you recite all the homework under pressure to someone, it improves your memorization tenfold. There's a magic to reciting to someone. And the way our teachers explained it is, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam would recite the Qur'an every Ramadan to Sayyidina Jibreel alayhi salatu wasalam. So it's definitely related to the barakah of that. That the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave us a method. And he would recite it to someone. The Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah has blessed him with the best mind. Allah has blessed him with the best memorization. These are programs for us to follow. A lot of hifz teachers might not relate back to this, because to be a hafiz doesn't mean you're a scholar. It doesn't mean you know that this is how the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam did it. But they've been given a program generation after generation, and these programs are all related back to the Sunnah. When you recite to someone else, this is related back to that Sunnah. When you recite to someone else, there's pressure to it. Same thing with Tarawih. Our teachers say, if a person recites the entire Qur'an in Tarawih every year, it's going to do wonders for his memorization. It's going to do wonders for his preserving his memorization of the Qur'an. So you have to recite the homework to someone. Once you're done with the homework, then you prepare your sabki. Now, homework, when you memorize your homework, you memorize it in a chopped up way. The homework is divided into pieces, and you combine those pieces. So there's not that much rhythm and flow to when you recite your homework. Because when you recite your homework, when you're reciting to someone, you're always thinking, oh, what's the next part, what's the next part? Eventually, when the homework transfers into sabki, and when the sabki transfers into manzil, you're not reciting it slowly anymore. You're not reciting it in a way that it's chopped up anymore, for a lack of a better word. When you're reciting it, there has to be a rhythm and a flow. You can't think, oh, what's next, what's next, what's next. Because when you think too much, you get flustered and you make mistakes. So when it comes to sabki and manzil, you have to make sure that when you're reciting with the flow. Don't recite too slow. You're not doing tilawah, You're not doing qira'ah at some event. You're doing hadar. You're supposed to read with a certain speed. So when you're doing sabki and manzil, let there be some speed to it. There has to be rhythm and flow. Because once you start, once it becomes solidified in your memory, the way you're reciting it, the words just come to you. You don't think what's the next word. It's natural because you've practiced it so many times that the flow allows the words to come to you constantly. So a lot of times when Hufaz are reciting in Taraweeh, we're not thinking what's the next word, what's the next word. Our tongue is just flowing and it's just unleashed and it's just going and going and going. So when you're memorizing your homework, you have to recite slow and you have to make sure that everything is recited properly and you think a lot about it. But when you come to sabki and manzil, you have to make sure that when you're reciting your sabki and manzil, there's always a rhythm. There's always a flow to it. Right now in the beginning, when you're still a new hifz student, I hope I didn't take the wrong route. Okay. When you're still a new hifz student, you won't see all these things. You won't see them manifest yet. You have to be patient with the process. It's not easy. It's very, very hard. But stick to these tips, these techniques. It's techniques. And eventually you're going to see what I mean when I say flow. Now, alhamdulillah, I finished my Qur'an back March 3rd, 2003. That was the day I recited my last homework to my teacher. And since then, with each year, with each recycle of my Qur'an, with each completion of my Qur'an, my rhythm and my flow improves. Now when I recite, it's just flowing. I'm not thinking about what's coming up next. So that's something that you have to bear in mind, that the sabak, your recitation, your speed, your rhythm for the sabak is completely different for the rhythm and speed you're supposed to have for your sabki and manzil. When you recite your sabki and manzil, there has to be a speed and flow to it. Just because we hear Qari Sadiq al-Minshawi and Qari Abdul Basit, they recite very, very slow. For a hifz student, that's not the program that you follow. You have to recite with a certain rhythm. Now, because I'm recording all this and you could revisit these things over and over again, I'll also mention things that might not be relevant to you right now because you're still memorizing, you're still in the beginning. But once you memorize 10 ajza, so I said there's sabak, sabki, manzil. Once you memorize, and the sabak, sabki, manzil comprises until Asr time, until like 5 p.m. you should be done with all of these things. But I'm talking about the madrasa schedule. And it might be a lot quicker for you because you're a lot older, so your mind might be better at memorizing. Usually the initial hifz student starts off with 3 lines, 4 lines because it takes some time to get accustomed to it. Their mind isn't used to studying. So probably because of that, initially the young hifz student doesn't start off with half a page or a full page. But you might get done with these things earlier. In our madrasa, there were 15, 20 students in our class. So that's probably another reason why it took that long. So you don't have to follow the number of hours that it took for us. It might be a lot quicker for you to get through sabak, sabki, manzil. But eventually, once we did 10 ajza, we added another component to this threefold program. And that other component was that every day, when you do 10 ajza, every day you have to recite 2 juz'ain, every day 2 juz'an, juz'ain, however it is in the sentence, we're average grammar students. But if I'm making a mistake, correct me. Every single day you have to recite 2 juz looking, visually, not to your teacher. The sabak, you memorize it and you recite it to someone. The sabki, you prepare it and then you recite it to someone. The manzil, you prepare it, then you recite it to someone. These 3 things have to be recited to someone once it's ready, once it's prepared. There has to be a person that you bounce all of this off of, because a lot of times the person reciting, the first person is not that cognizant of the mistakes he's making as the third person. That's why these 3 things have to be recited. But once you have 10 ajza memorized, you have to recite 2 juz every day looking. There's no third person involved anymore. This is a personal personal endeavor. Every single day, you have to memorize 2 juz. You could fit it in your schedule however you want. What we used to do was, we used to do sabak sabki manzil, we used to recite to the teacher, and when we would go home, we would memorize our homework to recite the next day, and sometime in there you could fit this 2 juz program. This is to completely establish your visual memorization. Visual memorization makes it a lot easier to memorize. So the 2 juz, so after 10 ajza, when you have 10 ajza memorized, every single day you recite 2 juz. Looking. All the letters, you got to pay attention to how they're placed on the page, how the word is placed in the line, how it looks. You have to pay attention to all those details. It improves your visual memorization. And then when you have 20 ajza memorized, then you upgrade to 3 juz every single day. And then eventually when you're done with your hifz, it doesn't end there. This is a lifelong program. It's a lifelong struggle. Until this day, when I was done with my hifz, and this is why it's easier for children to do hifz, because their parents or I wouldn't use the word dictators, they're the ones who are giving them the discipline. The child has to listen. When you're older, it's a struggle against your nafs. When you're younger, it's not a struggle against your nafs because you got to listen to your parents. But when I was done with my hifz, I completed my hifz at around the age of 12 to 13. I was, I think, 4 to 5 months shy of turning 13. When I finished my memorization of the Qur'an, after that, every single day, we would not have breakfast until every morning we recited 3 ajza. And my brother and I, both of us memorized. My brother and I did this. My mom made us do this for, I think we did this at least, 4 to 5 years. We used to do 3 ajza every single day. And because when you're younger, school's not that difficult. You're not worried about board exams. You're not worried about SATs. So you could fit that into your program. We might think that it's hard, and even now, there's not much barakah in my time, but we spend so much time doing other things that if you fit it into your post-Fajr schedule, and by the way, another thing is, I've seen with a lot of students of knowledge, they do a lot of awrad. My hifz teacher said, for the fresh hifz student, or for the hifz student who's memorizing, this is my teacher's opinion, he's Pakistani, he has his own method, but he said, the width of the hifz student is Qur'an, Qur'an, Qur'an. In his opinion, you won't even recite Al-Wardul Latif in the morning. Those 15 minutes should be spent doing your 2 ajza or 3 ajza, visual. I'm talking about post-hifz. Once you're done with your hifz, for 3-4 years, every morning you read 3 ajza every day. According to my hifz teacher, that's given precedence over any wird. Even if you did bay'ah with someone, you're part of a silsila, this is his opinion, but you recite 3 ajza every day. And if your wird is coming in the way of this, then you recite the Qur'an. That's his opinion. For after you're done with your hifz, for 3-4 years, you have to make sure that you do the 3 ajza program every single day. Because those are the years where still your memorization is very fresh. You cannot afford to allow it to slip into oblivion in your mind. It can't be slipped into the cold storages of your mind where it's hard for you to recall everything. How do you ensure that that doesn't happen and that eventually you don't forget? And once you forget the Qur'an, it's very hard to rememorize. I have a lot of friends who tried, but it's very hard on the nafs to get back into that discipline. The nafs does not let you get back. Shaitan makes sure that you don't slip back into that program anymore. So you have to make sure that you recite 2 ajza, 3 ajza every single day. I won't take too much of your time. I'm driving. I could speak for the next couple of minutes because I'm not home yet. But this is the general gist of things. Listen to what I said and map it out on paper, because there's a lot of things that I said that, I probably started going off on tangents. But write it down, map it on a piece of paper. Everything that I said, map it out, and based off of your schedule, based off of your responsibilities, adapt this, inculcate this program into your schedule, how much allowance you could give this strict, disciplined routine to your schedule, and map it out on a piece of paper, create a program out of it. Once you create a program, and in your program you make all the considerations, once you create the program with all the considerations of your life and all of your responsibilities, then you have to follow the program rigidly, with discipline, every single day. This routine I explained to you, we were kids, so I don't, it has no credit to me. And hifz, another thing, my teacher says this all the time, hifz has nothing to do with intelligence. Hifz has nothing to do with brains. Hifz has nothing to do with the person's gifts that Allah has. Hifz is pure tawfiq. It's pure tawfiq. We've had students in our class who weren't academically bright, to speak very frankly. They weren't academically bright at all, but they were the best of hufaz in our class. They might have struggled memorizing their daily homeworks, but once they were done with their hifz, they were very good at retaining all of it. And it's all tawfiq. And another thing my teacher says is, he says, the Qur'an does not come to a person's heart until it breaks you down and makes you submit to it. We might all pay lip service and say, we submit and, we understand and this, that. No, the Qur'an is going to make you cry. The Qur'an is going to make you realize that it's not an easy journey. It says in the Qur'an, لَوْ أَنزَلْنَا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ عَلَى جَبَلٍ لَرَأَيْتَهُ خَاشِعًا مُتَصَدِّعًا مِنْ خَشْيَةِ اللَّهِ. The mountains would have shattered out of the weight of this Qur'an. And it is only because, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Qur'an to the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and because he revealed it to the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he is the rahmatul lil alameen, and it's through that rahmah that it came from his heart, from his tongue, to the rest of the ummah, and that's why it became doable for us. It's not doable to memorize the Qur'an if we did not have that wasila. That's very important to recognize. You have to recognize memorization of the Qur'an is pure tawfiq. So you have to always do dua, and you have to always recognize that you are going to fulfill the rights of the Qur'an. You're going to give it its due time, and it's going to be given precedence over everything. Inshallah, that's something that's very important. And another thing my teacher would say, I think these statements from your teachers, they add flavor to your memorization. They add perspective, so it's good to share them. But he would say something. I was at NBIC the other day, and someone mentioned to me that some people memorize the Qur'an, and the teacher would not, for example, if you're doing your sabki, the teacher would not let you do the next homework, or would not let you do the next manzil unless you did not have a single mistake in your recitation. I don't think that's true. You make mistakes. It takes years to reach that level of hifz that you don't make mistakes anymore. The initial student makes mistakes. If you're reciting your homework, 1 or 2 mistakes is not something that your homework should be rejected over. If you make more than that, then yes, you should recite it again and go back to your teacher. Let me add another thing. Whenever you make a mistake, you fix it, and when you're fixing, so for example, if someone makes a mistake in the verse, لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, when you're reciting it, you got to read, لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. When you're reciting it, don't worry about flow, don't worry about rhythm. You got to drill it. You got to have a beat to it. لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. And the word that, so for example, if the particular word that you're making a mistake in is lillahi, you're going to drill that. Lillahi, 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 lillahi ma fi samawati ma fi al-ard. Lillahi ma fi samawati ma fi al-ard. So that's another technique. When we would recite sabki manzil to our teachers were not that concerned with the mistakes that we would make. They were more concerned with the moments of forgetfulness that we would have. So if I'm making a haraka mistake, that's a mistake that you just have the student read over and over again and he could fix it. But if you're having a problem in forgetting and in stumbling, hesitating, completely lapsing, that's an indication that you did not prepare your sabki well. That's an indication that you did not prepare your manzil well. And one of the signs that you're doing that is not having any flow in reciting your sabki or manzil. So if you're reciting your sabki like سيقول السفهاء من الناس ما ولا when you're reciting like that, that means you haven't prepared well. And it means that when you were doing your sabki and your manzil, you did not pay attention to the fact that you should read with flow. And now when you recite, you're always reciting as if it's all chopped up in the realms of your mind. So that's another thing to pay attention to. My teacher would say that the Qur'an is like an ocean, and we are navigating the ocean in a boat. And to think that the boat is going to traverse the oceans without being hit by waves is foolish. You're going to make mistakes here and there. Sometimes you're going to have problems with memorization, but it's an ocean, you know. It's expected that here and there you're going to have a rocky ride. My teacher says that sometimes, you know, you might have a person who recites the entire Qur'an, he doesn't have a single mistake, and then he reaches Surah Ikhlas, he reaches Qul Huwallahu Ahad, and there he forgets. And the Qur'an is a wondrous journey. It's going to make you realize that you got to humble yourself when you embark in this endeavor. So these are things to bear in your mind. Bear in mind it's an ocean. Don't be too hard on yourself, but stick to the routine. Be disciplined. No matter how hard it is, you have to make sure that you never relax on the routine. It's all about the routine. It's all about discipline. It's all about following the program. And then once your memorization is finished, then it's only, you know, every day you do 1 hour. You recite the 3 Ajza every day, 1 hour, an hour and a half, however long it takes. And I'll also tell you, last point, sorry for the very long call, but I'll also add one thing. For example, when you read your awrad or when you read different things, this is something that I noticed with, you know, people who have studied in Yemen, or Arabs probably in general. When you're reciting the awrad, because you're a hifz student now, so it's not the same standard for you that it is for the other people. Whenever you're reciting anything in Arabic, make sure you pronounce all the words properly, and make sure you're not mumbling the words, you're not reciting too fast. So for example, when we recite Wird al-Latif in a congregation, sometimes we recite very fast. Even if you're reciting fast with the rest of the congregation or you're reading on yourself, don't recite too fast, because at the end of the day, it's Arabic, and if you are mispronouncing words and other things, that's going to eventually reach your pronunciation of the Qur'an. Once you're done with the hifz, you're not going to spend that much time with the Qur'an. It's going to be a small section of the day that you dedicate to your recitation daily, and because of that, you're reciting other stuff and you're not reciting with pronunciation. That's going to compromise your pronunciation in the Qur'an as well. So from here onwards, when you're reciting iqamah, when you're reciting adhan, when you're reciting awrad, when you're speaking to someone and you quote a hadith or you quote a verse from the Qur'an, don't recite fast, don't mumble the words. Each letter has its due right, and you have to make sure that you give each letter its due right, but you don't spend so much time on each letter that it compromises the right of the upcoming letter. Everything in balance, but you can't recite super fast anymore. And I say this because other, you know, people who aren't doing hifz, non-hifz students recite things fast when they do the iqamah, etc., etc. So you have to be diligent with that as well. Inshallah, I'm going to conclude here. It's a very long talk, so just hear it once and write things out that's necessary, and then the rest you could, you know, just keep it stored somewhere. And inshallah, keep me in your prayers. Special du'as for me, my mother, my whole family. I say my mother because my mother and my hifz teacher, Qadi Muhammad Hussein al-Rifa'i, and my other hifz teacher, Qadi Nu'man, and my other hifz teacher, Qadi Jamil. If you could remember them in your prayers when you listen to this talk.